Assalamu alaikum, my dear students of class 8. I welcome you all to the biology class. As you know that we are on week 12 and today is the last day of week 12. So we have started lesson cells and tissues. Today we are going to study about the history of the formulation of cell theory and then what are the postulates of cell theory. You will be able to know the history of formulation of cell theory and you will learn the principles of cell theory. Let's start. History of cell theory. First, before history of cell theory, we focus on the microscopy. We know we have studied in the previous lesson about the two basic terms related to microscope. What were those? Those were magnification and resolving power. Now, we are going to study history of microscope. As we know that the first microscope was created or invented by scientists named Hans and Zacharias Janssen. They were the glass makers, they were the eyeglass makers, and Zacharias and his son Hans Janssen, they experimented with two lenses placed in a tube, and this is how the first microscope looked like. It was having a tube and two lenses at both ends. We will proceed with the history of the formulation of cell theory. Aristotle, he presented the idea that all animals and plants are somehow related. Later, this idea gave rise to a question that is there a fundamental unit of structure shared by all organisms? So, is there any? Yes. Now we know that fundamental unit of structure which is shared by all organisms is known as a cell. It can be in many forms. It has many types like red blood cells, bone cells, muscle cells, we all know. Cells were first described by a British scientist named Robert Hooke. So these two scientists, Robert Hooke and Anton van Leeuwenhoek, are the ones who contributed for the formulation of cell theory. Robert Hooke was the first person to see cells. He was looking at cork and noted that he saw a great many boxes, and these boxes were termed as cells. He called the compartments in this cork as cellulae. His term has now come to us as cells. The first living cells were observed by few years later by Antony van Leeuwenhoek. He observed tiny organisms from the pond water under his microscope and he called them animalcules, since they were similar to animal but very much smaller in size. But at that time he didn't knew that, so he called them animalcules. Then Robert Brown, he discovered the cell nucleus. He was able to see the nucleus due to advancements in microscope technology. So nucleus was discovered. After that came the two main scientists, Matthias Schleiden and Theodor Schwann. So Matthias Schleiden studied plant tissues and made the first statement of cell theory. So he was a botanist and he studied the plants. He stated that all plants are aggregates of individual cells which are fully independent. And 1 year later, a zoologist who was Theodor Schwann, he reported that all animal tissues are also composed of individual cells. So they proposed the initial form of cell theory. Now, then came the scientist Rudolf Virchow. He proposed an extension in the cell theory. He was a German physician and he proposed an extension. He proposed that all living cells arise only from pre-existing cells. Omnis cellula is cellula means cells arise by the previously existing cells. They cannot be created on their own. This idea was proved later by Louis Pasteur also. Now here is the timeline to study the cell theory. We will start from extreme left hand side where it is written 1600. So before 1600, microscope was invented by Hans Janssen. Then Robert Hooke was able to see the first cells in the cork. Then Antony van Leeuwenhoek, he called animalcules by observing some small organisms in pond water. Then Matthias Schleiden, who was the botanist, he concluded that all plants are made of cells. After that, the zoologist Theodor Schwann, he also noted that all animals are made of cells, and they gave the initial form of the cell theory. The cell theory was later extended by Rudolf Virchow. He proposed that all cells come from cells, means pre-existing cells. Then transmission electron microscope and scanning electron microscopes were also invented. The modern cell theory. It consists of the three postulates, the three main principles. By Schwann and Schleiden in 1839, cell theory had two basic principles, and these were: all organisms consist of one or more cells. Number 2, cells are the smallest living things. The cell is the basic unit of structure for all organisms. Then the third postulate was proposed by Rudolf Virchow, that all cells arise from pre-existing cells only. Let's wrap up today's lesson. We know that the first two postulates of cell theory were proposed by botanist and zoologist, means Theodor Schwann and Schleiden. Then the third point was proposed by Rudolf Virchow, and these 3 points are that all organisms are having a basic unit called cell, and the cells are the smallest living things which are the basis of life, and the cells only arise by pre-existing cells. This is all for today. Now your task is to complete the week 12 assignment. I hope you will do it very easily. Thank you.